The heavy scent of aged wood and stale beer permeated the kitchen of the Connor household, but lately, it had been overtaken by a more medicinal, lingering aroma. Dan Connor stood before the open refrigerator, the low hum of the appliance acting as the only soundtrack to his thoughts. He squinted at a translucent plastic container tucked away behind a half-empty jar of pickles. The contents were a mystery of beige and white, a culinary relic of the grief that had swept through the town of Lanford over the past few weeks. Was that tuna casserole or potato salad? Dan asked aloud, his voice gravelly and thick with the fatigue of a man who had forgotten what a full night of sleep felt like. He looked toward Darlene, who was leaning against the chipped laminate counter, her eyes fixed on a spot on the floor that had been worn smooth by years of foot traffic. No idea, Darlene replied without looking up from her phone. At this point, it is just mayonnaise and communal obligation. It has been 3 weeks since the celebration of life for Granny Rose. Why are people still giving us casseroles? And why is it that when someone dies, the immediate instinct of every neighbor is to bake something that requires a gallon of cream of mushroom soup? It is actually a practical gift, Becky chimed in as she entered the room, her voice carrying the weariness of 1,000 sleepless nights with the baby. When people are in deep, soul-crushing pain, the last thing they want to do is stand over a stove and worry about nutrition. A casserole is a way of saying I know you are hurting, and I do not want you to starve while you do it. And when the casserole is finally gone, Darlene countered, her voice sharpening with that familiar edge of cynicism. What if the person who passed away was the only one in the house who actually knew how to cook? Then what? Do we just stay in pain until we figure out how to fill ourselves up? I honestly feel bad that it is taking us so long to return all these plastic containers to their rightful owners. We have a graveyard of mismatched lids in the pantry. That is true, Becky agreed, her gaze drifting toward the window. Other people die, and their neighbors get casseroles in neatly labeled tubs. But for us, it feels like the world has stopped, yet life keeps demanding that we wash dishes and return favors. It is not as if the Grim Reaper is taking a coffee break while we walk around here, trying to remember how to breathe. Suddenly, the doorway was occupied by a figure that seemed to vibrate with a frantic, nervous energy. Jackie stepped into the kitchen, her hands fluttering like trapped birds. "Must we still talk about death?" she asked, her voice reaching a high, tremulous pitch that set everyone on edge. "Every time you mention it, it reminds me of my sister. It reminds me of the hole in the middle of this family that is never going to close." "Sleep, sweetheart," Dan said softly, reaching out to pat Jackie on the arm with a gentleness that only he could manage in the midst of his own sorrow. "Go lie down for a bit. I have everything under control. I will handle the mystery mayonnaise and the mountains of laundry." "Hey, thanks," Darlene said as Jackie retreated toward the living room. We probably should not have had that specific conversation where she could hear us. It was a bit much even for this house. "That is the reason why I am here," a sharp, brittle voice announced from the hallway. Grandma Bev shuffled into the room, her 92-year-old frame appearing surprisingly sturdy despite the weight of the moment. "I know that Roseanne would ask me to step in and play a role in this family. She would want me to keep things moving, to ensure that you all do not simply dissolve into a puddle of self-pity." "No, it would kill her," Dan muttered under his breath, his eyes fixed on the linoleum. "But she is already dead, Dan," Bev pointed out with a brutal efficiency that only she possessed. "So, let us begin the work of moving on. No mother should ever have to see her own children die. It is against the natural order of things, a cruel twist of fate that I am forced to endure while the rest of you just mope." "Mama, you are 92, Darlene reminded her, her voice a mix of love and exasperation. "You are going to see all of us die. You are going to outlive the sun. And then, when there is nothing left of the human race but stardust, you will probably be the one to turn off the last robot." The tension in the room was suddenly broken by the sound of the front door swinging open. A gust of fresh air rushed in, and with it came Gina. She stood in the doorway, her uniform dusty from travel, her eyes bright with the relief of being home. "Hey, guys," she called out, her presence like a burst of sunlight in the dim kitchen. "Gina," DJ yelled, rushing from the other room to pull her into a tight embrace. "Hey, I am so glad you are here. I thought you would never make it back." "I am so sorry that I missed the actual service," Gina said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. The airport in Afghanistan was under attack for a while. Everything was locked down. It was a nightmare, honestly. It felt like getting through security was slower than O'Hare on a holiday weekend, and with a lot more gunfire. She set a heavy bag on the table, the contents rustling. "These are just fruits and more fruits," she explained, gesturing to the bag. "I noticed the kitchen was full of heavy cakes and fried things. If you do not eat well, your heart can attack you just like Granny Rose's heart attacked her. We need vitamins, not just comfort food that clogs the arteries." "Oh, I must take this," Jackie said, reappearing with a bundle of clothes clutched to her chest. "I just finished cleaning out Mama's dresser. I was going through the drawers and I found these. Do you remember how she always used to scream that she was not wearing shoes? How she hated the restriction of them? Well, here they are. Every single pair she ever owned, from the loafers to the sensible heels she never actually wore. It feels wrong to just leave them there." She turned her attention to Dan, her eyes narrowing with concern. "Dan, Papa, you must sleep in your bed. I saw you this morning on the couch, tangled in that old Afghan. Sleeping on the couch is bad for your back. And you are not a young man anymore. You need proper support." "I was just watching television," Dan insisted, his eyes darting toward the blank screen in the living room. "It was not the end of the world. I just drifted off during a commercial. I did not mean to make it a habit." "I read an article in the dermatologist's office recently," Mark interrupted, looking up from a textbook he had spread out on the counter. "It said that it is actually very common for people to avoid sleeping in a bed where someone has recently died. It is a psychological response to trauma, a way of avoiding the cold reality of the loss. It is a form of spatial grief." "Fascinating," Dan replied, his voice dripping with heavy sarcasm. "Truly groundbreaking stuff, Mark. I am glad we have a resident scientist to explain why I am uncomfortable. Beyond that, have you ever read something that someone actually wants to hear? Something that might make the day a little easier to swallow?" "No. Usually not," Mark admitted with a small shrug. "No." Becky turned to Gina, changing the subject to something more grounded. "Gina, how long do they give you? How long before you have to go back to the base in Afghanistan?" "Oh, they only give you a 5-day leave for the death of a direct family member." Gina sighed, her expression clouding over. "It is a very short window of time to process something this big. I feel like I just got here and I am already looking at my watch. Aunt Darlene says that Granny Rose is going to come back as a murderer or a grasshopper," Mary said, her eyes wide with a child wonder. "She said she could be anywhere, watching us from the tall grass or lurking in the shadows. That is really sweet in a terrifying way," Becky noted, glancing at Darlene. "But I think Aunt Darlene should probably go get her yoga pants and a Bible. Maybe find a middle ground between Eastern reincarnation and Midwestern reality. It is not so crazy." "Really?" Darlene defended herself, leaning back against the counter. "Reincarnation is a legitimate belief system. There are over 1 billion people on this planet who believe that we come back in different forms to learn the lessons we missed. It is not just me being weird." "Well, you should probably make your reservation in the afterlife soon then," Dan joked darkly. "Because if 1 billion people are waiting in line to become grasshoppers, it is going to be crowded and the queue will be miles long." "Reservation?" Jackie asked, looking genuinely confused. "Why would we need a reservation for the afterlife? Do they take credit cards? We already have a cabana for the summer trip in July." Darlene took a deep breath, her expression shifting from cynical to serious. "Ben, can I talk to you for a second?" she asked, pulling him toward the quiet corner of the hallway where the coats hung heavy on the rack. "I just got off the phone with a friend who works in the medical examiner office. The final results of the autopsy came back this morning." Dan followed them, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What did they find?" "The autopsy found that it was not a simple heart attack," Darlene said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to remain clinical. Roseanne tested positive for opioids. High levels of them. Dad. That is impossible, Dan whispered, the world around him suddenly feeling very cold and very thin. We knew she had a problem a few months ago, but she was only 2 days out from her knee surgery. She told me she was only taking ibuprofen and the occasional aspirin. She promised me she was staying clean. She looked me in the eye and lied. That must be wrong. Dan insisted, his voice cracking. There has to be a mistake in the lab. Maybe they mixed up the samples. I wish it were, Darlene said, her eyes filling with tears that she refused to let fall. But the examiner thinks she took the pills right before bed. With her existing health problems and the weight issues, it was enough to stop her heart while she slept. She did not even know it was happening. She just went to sleep and never woke up. I did not know, Dan stammered, leaning against the wall for support. Wait, what? Roseanne had an addiction that I did not see? That makes no sense. I fixed her knee. I checked all her pill bottles every night. I thought I was protecting her from the world, and all the time, she was protecting her secret from me. Oh my God, Becky yelled from the kitchen. She had been rummaging through the back of a high cabinet where the holiday dishes were kept. I found these pills in Mama's closet. They were hidden inside a pair of old boots that she has not worn in years. These are not even prescribed for her. The label says they were for Marcy Bellinger. Jackie moved toward the small plastic bottle, her hands shaking. That is the only thing I wanted from Mama's closet. She cried, looking at the evidence of her sister's secret struggle. I cannot believe how far she went with these pills. I cannot believe she felt she had to hide this from us. Her own family. Maybe we should just tell the credit collectors that Roseanne died and let them deal with the empty house, Darlene suggested, her mind already racing toward the practical fallout of the tragedy. Remember how she used that excuse 5 times herself to get out of paying the power bill when she was still alive? It would be the most Roseanne thing we could ever do as a tribute. Yes. But I think we should really consider selling the house and moving somewhere that does not smell like memories. Becky said, her voice small and fragile. Everything in here feels like it is haunted by things we did not say and truths we were too scared to face. Are we terrible for laughing right now? Mark asked, looking at the adults with a confused expression. We are talking about death and addiction and hidden pills. And yet we are making jokes about credit collectors and robots. Well, I am tired of crying, Darlene admitted, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. And laughing at things that are unfair and cruel is exactly what Roseanne taught us to do. It was her survival mechanism. I still cannot believe she is gone, but I know she would hate it if we were all sitting here in a circle of silence. You know what? Becky said, standing up with a sudden burst of resolve. I cannot deal with the talk of pills anymore. It is too much weight for one afternoon. I have to go finish my shift at the restaurant. We have a full house tonight, and they need the extra help with the dinner rush. Okay. But we have to finish cleaning out the house and sorting through her things before the bank comes knocking. Darlene said, we will do it on Friday night. We will just get it over with like a bandage. I cannot do it then. I have a date. Becky replied, her voice defiant. Okay. Fine. We will do it on Saturday night instead. Darlene conceded, her temper beginning to flare. I just told you that I have a date on Friday night, Becky repeated, her eyes flashing. Darlene, you cannot expect me to just stay vertical and functional for another day without some kind of break. Look, maybe you can handle this cold and clinical approach to her death, but I cannot. I already went through this once when Mark died. I spent months in a fog of grief and regret, and I do not want to do it again. You are not going to just throw everything of Mama and Papa away as if it never mattered, okay? I have 2 children to think about, and I have a full-time job. I am doing the best I can with a broken heart. No, Darlene snapped, her own grief manifesting as anger. You are the official choice to take over the household responsibilities because you are the oldest, but you are acting like a child who wants to go to the playground. You live here already, and you are becoming a terrible tyrant about the schedule. Are you just going to insult me and then walk out like you always do? Becky asked, grabbing her purse. You are right, Darlene said, reaching for her own coat. I'm going to get my phone and find someone to take over my shift so I can stay here and do the emotional labor you are avoiding. I am going to do what is right for the family, even if it kills me. You are too trusting, Becky. You think everything will just work itself out because the universe is kind, but it won't. You might want to work on your reality check. Hey, you and Becky must come together, Gina said, stepping between the two sisters like a peacekeeper. This is exactly what we do not need right now. What if one of you dies tomorrow and the last thing you ever did together was have a fight about a schedule? Life is too short for this level of resentment. Oh. Hey, Darlene replied, looking at Mark, who was watching them with wide eyes from the corner. Do you remember how you and Granny Rose used to fight a lot before she died? Over the smallest things like the television remote or the last cookie. A little bit, Mark whispered, his voice small. You know, families fight, Darlene said, sitting down next to him and softening her tone. It is part of the deal we make when we are born, but we know that we always love each other, even when we are screaming at the top of our lungs. And it is in all the letters that Granny Rose left for us. She made sure we knew the truth. Did Granny Rose write a letter to everyone in the family? Mark asked, hope flickering in his voice for the first time that day. Oh God. Maybe not everyone, Darlene admitted, realizing she might have overpromised in her attempt to comfort him. You are scaring me now, Mark said, pulling his jacket tighter. I am going to die tomorrow if you keep being so gloomy and mysterious about these letters. Later that afternoon, Darlene walked into the garage to find Dan standing by the side of his truck. He was holding a large paintbrush, and there was a bucket of black paint on the cracked concrete floor. What are you doing? She asked, noticing the large, messy letters he was beginning to form on the side of the vehicle. Roseanne always wanted to do something like this, Dan explained without looking up, his focus entirely on the stroke of the brush. She wanted to make a statement, to let the whole town know where we stood. And I thought that with all the trouble we have had in the last few years, and the previous 40 years of unmentioned resentment that we just swept under the rug like dust, this would be a good time to fulfill her dream. It is a tribute to her spirit. When will it be dry? Darlene asked, squinting at the words. I wanted to use the truck to go pick up some things from the store. And I wanted to watch television for a little while without worrying about getting black paint on the upholstery. It takes 3 to 5 days to fully cure, Dan replied, dipping his brush back into the bucket with a steady hand. I have been thinking about what I said earlier to you girls, and I noticed that it was terrible and varied in its cruelty. I see that now, because I have to drive to work and face the people in this town. I have to be the man they expect me to be. I am sorry that you lost her. Dan, his friend Chuck said, walking into the garage with a quiet, respectful tread. She was a force of nature, and the town feels smaller without her. It is in the house, Chuck, Dan said, gesturing toward the kitchen with the handle of his brush. The loss is everywhere. I like it in a strange way. It keeps her close, like she is just in the other room about to yell at me. Is your sympathy for close friends only? Or are you handing it out to everyone on the street today? No, Chuck replied, shaking his head slowly. That sympathy is for the home. My hurt is deeper than that. Dan, I think it goes all the way to Zurich. It is a global ache that I cannot seem to shake. Papa, what is that? Darlene asked, pointing at the truck again as the message became clearer and more aggressive. What does it look like to you? Dan countered, stepping back to admire his handiwork. It looks like a defense of a very long and bitter argument that no one else was invited to, she said. You cannot do that, Dad. You cannot drive around town with that painted on the side of your professional vehicle. I only took the magnetic sign from the side of your truck because it was embarrassing, and now you have made it permanent and much harder to remove. People are taking pictures of us anyway, Dan said, his voice hard and uncompromising. That is the point. They want to stare at the wreckage? Let them stare at the truth. Set it back. Darlene, let me have this one thing. Look, I know that you are angry, Darlene said, her voice softening as she saw the pain behind his defiance. I know you want to lash out at the world for taking her away, but that will not help bring her back. It just makes the neighbors whisper more. It helps me. Dan insisted, his hand tightening on the brush until his knuckles were white. Now I can both express my rage and drive my truck through the house if I feel like the walls are closing in on me. It is a dual-purpose tool. Do not do that, Chuck warned, pointing a finger at Dan with genuine concern. My friend did that once during a bad divorce, and he had so much trouble with the revocation of his license. The state does not take kindly to vehicular home entry, regardless of the emotional circumstances. Thanks for the tip, Chuck, Dan said, setting the brush down. Let us go. I need to get some air that does not smell like paint fumes. The truck through the house thing. That is just a figure of speech, right? Mark asked, his voice trembling as he watched them leave the garage. He looked at the massive truck and imagined it crashing through the living room wall. Papa, these are Enrique and Joey, Mark said a few minutes later, introducing two boys from his class who were standing awkwardly on the gravel driveway. Hello, man, Dan said, nodding to the boys with a forced smile. Look, you guys can play here in the yard. I have things to do in the garage, but you do not have to leave. You are welcome here as long as you do not touch the wet paint. No, Darlene said, stepping out onto the back porch. They are leaving because I have work for Mark to do in the kitchen. They only came over to get a drink of water, and then they are heading home. I am sorry to hear about your wife, Mr. Connor, Enrique said, his voice sincere and remarkably small for his size. Thank you, son, Dan replied, a momentary shadow of real pain crossing his face. People die. It is a part of the life we lead. What are you going to do? Have you seen a bit too much action in your young life to be talking like that? See you tomorrow, boys. And there is our resident police officer, Jackie noted as she walked past them, her eyes red from another crying spell. All right. The law has arrived to maintain the peace. I am in the garage, buddy, Dan told Mark, heading back to his sanctuary of tools and sawdust. Okay, Mark said, following him like a shadow. Can I ask you something? It is about school and the bus. Sure, if it is fast, Dan replied, picking up a heavy wrench. Granny Rose and I talked about the field trip on Friday, and we never actually finished the conversation before she went to sleep, Mark explained. There are two kids who want me to sit next to them on the bus, and she was going to help me figure out who to choose. Because whoever I sit next to, it means I like them as more than just a regular friend. It is a big social commitment for a middle schooler. That does not sound like a fast conversation, buddy, Dan said, setting the wrench down and giving the boy his full attention. Are you one of them? Boys. The ones I just saw standing in the driveway. Yes. Enrique and Joey, Mark answered. Do you want to talk more about death? Because that seems to be the only other topic people are interested in today. I just have to make a decision, Mark insisted. It is important to my social standing for the rest of the semester. I have to be honest with you, buddy, Dan said, looking at the boy with a weary but kind smile. There is a reason why your mother and Aunt Becky handle all these emotional things. They have the stamina for it. It is a measure of my deep love for you that I have already flown out of the room in my mind. I am currently mentally at a bowling alley 3 towns over, drinking a very cold soda. Grandpa Dan, Mark asked, stepping closer. Yes. Mark, do you ever like a boy? In that way? Like the way people talk about in the movies? No, Dan replied, his voice steady and without a hint of judgment. Does it bother you that I do? No, Dan said, reaching out to ruffle the boy hair. I have been waiting for you to tell me about it. I was just waiting for you to be ready to say the words. I am sorry it took so long, Mark whispered, looking relieved. Okay, let it not happen again, Dan said. No more secrets between us. I hope everyone enjoys the movie tonight. I am going to stay here and have fun on this hard wooden chair, paying for the privilege of sitting at a plastic table that came from the home buffet. At least you do not have a wet backside when you sit on the couch, Jackie called out from the living room. Her voice muffled as she continued to scrub the upholstery with a damp cloth and a bucket of soapy water. Oh, did I forget to tell you that your Aunt Jackie was washing the couch with a bucket of soapy water because she thought it looked dusty? Dan asked Darlene as she walked by the hallway. My sincere apologies for the dampness. You definitely could have told me that before I sat down and started my show. Darlene snapped, looking at the damp patch on her trousers. Yes, I could have done that, Dan admitted, a small spark of the old humor returning to his eyes for the first time in weeks. I am going to get more coffee to fuel my organizational rage. Does anyone else want a cup of liquid energy? I will go with you, Becky said, following him into the kitchen. Do not touch, Jackie screamed as they reached for the coffee pot. I have a very specific system in place for the morning rotation. What exactly are you doing, Jackie? Becky asked, pulling her hand back as if the pot were made of lava. I am making life easier for everyone with the concept of the kitchen work triangle that I saw on a home improvement show on television, Jackie explained, her eyes wide and manic. The flow of labor should be from the refrigerator to the stove and then back to the refrigerator. It is the peak of human efficiency. Therefore, the coffee maker, which needs milk from the fridge, coffee from a canister next to the stove, and water from the fridge, should be at the geometric heart of the triangle. Which is exactly right here, in the middle of the counter where no one can reach it without a step stool. And where exactly are we supposed to plug it in? Dan asked, looking at the lack of outlets in the geometric heart. Yes, I have thought of that, Jackie said, her hands moving rapidly as she sketched in the air. I am going down into the basement. I will install a hole through the kitchen hallway, and then install a decorative pillar. We can run a cable from the fridge area, through the hallway, down into the basement, back up through the middle of the kitchen table, and then install a new outlet. Bam! We are making coffee in the future, using electricity from the underworld. I think you have had quite enough coffee for one day, Jackie, Darlene said, walking in and taking the sketchpad from her hand. You know what? Why don't you go home and get some actual sleep? I need you to be rested for the long break we are taking this weekend. No, Jackie yelled, her voice echoing off the walls. No, I am fine. I have the time now to do these things for you. I need to be useful. I just need to finish this one project before the holiday starts. Yes, you have already done so much, Dan said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Between your cleaning and your organizing. We can no longer sit on the couch or use the refrigerator without a map and a flashlight. I think that is a good start for any holiday celebration. Suddenly, Darlene pulled a small bag from the back of the freezer, behind a bag of frozen peas. Oh, she said, her voice turning cold and sharp. Where did these come from? Yes, I found them in an ice pack in the back of the fridge, Jackie said, her frantic energy suddenly evaporating like mist in the sun. Oh God. So Mama just hid pills everywhere? Becky asked, her voice trembling. Even in the freezer where the kids could find them? Yes, I knew you would be angry, Jackie admitted, looking at her feet. I wanted to throw them away as soon as I found them, but I forgot where I had put the trash can in all the excitement of the work triangle. If something is outside the heart of the triangle, it is essentially invisible to me. A knock at the back door interrupted the heavy silence that had fallen over the room. Dan went to open it and found a middle-aged woman standing on the porch, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. Can I help you? Dan asked, his voice guarded. I am Marcy Bellinger, she said, her voice small and shaky. Can I speak with Dan Connor? Please. I have this, Dan said, stepping outside and closing the door behind him so the kids would not hear. You have a lot of nerve showing up here. Marcy, please take that magnetic sign off your truck. The one talking about your business. It is an insult to her memory. No, Dan said, his voice a low growl. Everyone in this town has already seen it. You made your point. You want the world to know you are a victim? Well, you are not the only one. They all hate me, Marcy cried, her face crumpling. I cannot eat. I drink myself to sleep every night just to stop the shaking in my hands. I have to live with the weight of this for the rest of my life. Is that not enough for you? Is my suffering not enough to pay for my mistake? My wife is gone. Dan yelled, his grief finally boiling over into the cool evening air. She is gone because of a secret she kept. And you were the one who helped her keep it. What do you think I am feeling every time I look at her empty chair? Nobody in this town can afford their medication anymore, Marcy shouted back, her voice gaining strength from pure desperation. The insurance companies have abandoned us years ago. We all help each other. When Sally Benson needs Lipitor for her husband's cholesterol because they cannot afford the copay, they get a few pills from Maria Ramirez. They give her the anxiety medication she needs in return. Roseanne needed painkillers for her leg. She was in agony every day just to walk to the kitchen. I had some left over from my own surgery, so I gave them to her. I thought I was being a friend. I thought I was being kind. So you are part of a neighborhood drug ring? Dan said, his voice dripping with disgust. Congratulations. Marcy, you are a regular kingpin of Lanford. You should be proud. You know what, Dan? You can judge me all you want, but Roseanne called me, Marcy said, her voice cracking. She told me that her knee was not healing fast enough and that the pain was making it impossible for her to work. I was the only person she felt she could turn to without being judged. She said she needed those painkillers to get back to the restaurant because you were out of money and the bills were piling up on the table. Do not try to put the blame for her death on me. Dan said, his face turning a deep shade of red. You gave her the pills. She took them. She died. In my book. That means you killed her as surely as if you held a gun to her head. Papa. Stop. Darlene said, stepping out onto the porch and placing a steady hand on her father's shoulder. We just found another stash in the freezer. It is not just Marcy. Mama was getting painkillers from a lot of different people. She was a master of the secret. I would have never given them to her if I had known she had a problem. Marcy sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I know what it is like to have a problem with substances. I would have tried to help her. So, I am truly sorry for everything. Darlene looked at the broken woman on the porch. Darlene, can you drive Marcy home? Dan asked quietly, his anger seemingly spent, replaced by a hollow, echoing ache. Yes, Darlene said. Come on. Marcy, let us get you out of here. Are you okay? Dad? Becky asked after the car had pulled away. I do not know, Dan said, staring out at the darkening street. Who am I supposed to be angry at now? I thought Marcy Bellinger was a perfect choice for a villain until she showed up and destroyed that image by being sad and human and just as broken as we are. How are you holding up? I wish I had known. Becky whispered, a single tear rolling down her cheek. I wish she had felt she could tell me the truth. It would not have changed anything. Baby, Dan said, pulling her into a side hug. She would have done what she was going to do. She never listened to a single person in her entire life when her mind was made up. She was a mountain that would not be moved. Well, she should have, Becky said, because I still need her. I still want to be able to call her and ask her how I am supposed to do all this. How I am supposed to be a mother and a worker and a person without her voice in my ear. Your mother told me once that she gave you everything you needed to survive before you were 5 years old. Dan said, his voice nostalgic. I have no idea what that actually means in the long run. But she was convinced of it. Yes, I could never figure it out either, Becky said with a small, watery laugh. I think she probably just meant she stole a snack from the cupboard for me and called it a life lesson in resourcefulness. Man, she was stubborn. You know, I could not even get her to close the Velcro on her shoes when she went out to get the paper in the morning. And half the time, it was the neighbor paper she was stealing. You know what? Dan said, a tired smile finally reaching his eyes. Damn. I am still going to owe Marcy for those pills. Aren't I? In some cosmic way that I will never be able to pay back. Your mother would be proud of you for saying that. Jackie said, walking back into the kitchen with a fresh bucket of soapy water. Oh, Dan said, looking at the counters. There is no room for any of the kitchen tools anymore. You have moved everything to the center of the triangle. These are not just kitchen supplies. Jackie muttered, returning to her frantic scrubbing. These are not utensils. They are memories that need to be organized. I tried to put them in the cabinet with the gelatin molds. But that made no damn sense at all when you think about the flow of labor. It is okay, Aunt Jackie, Becky said, reaching out to take the sponge from her hand. I just wanted to stand in for her, Jackie cried, her voice breaking. You know, I just wanted to stand in after Roseanne and give you all everything you need to be happy. But I am only looking for things that I need. I keep packing and repacking these boxes. Nothing belongs anywhere. I do not even know where I belong anymore. I do not want to go home to my empty apartment. I do not want to leave this house because I feel like if I leave, I am leaving her behind in the dust. It is okay, Becky said, holding her aunt close. It is okay, Aunt Jackie. You know, it is hard for all of us. And you are just exhausted. You need to go home and sleep in your own bed. Okay. You can come back tomorrow morning and she will still be here in our hearts. She isn't going anywhere. Yes. But you all need help, Jackie insisted, though her eyes were already beginning to close. Oh, I will be fine, Dan said. You know that. And if you need me tonight, if the silence gets too loud, you call me. Okay. Every single time. I just want to be sure you are in order and safe. It hurts, Jackie whispered, clutching her arm. I know it hurts, Jackie. It has hurt for a long time, Dan said. No. The literal corn starch from the pantry is holding my shoulders stiff, Jackie noted, looking down at her white dusted sweater. Yes. It hurts physically. Yes. Okay, Jackie said, finally relenting. So, I think I should probably go home now and wash this sweater. Yes. DJ took Grandma Bev home a while ago, Becky said. She is probably surprised that he managed the drive without a map or a lecture. No. That was never really my experience with Bev, Dan joked. Hey, Junior. Come here. He called out to Mark. What is going on, Grandpa? Mark asked, walking into the room. Listen, my head was not fully in the game before. But now I am going to help you with your bus seat situation. Dan explained. It is important work for the future of the family. What is this? Mark asked, looking at the piece of paper Dan had started to draw on. We are going to compare the best qualities of the two boys you are considering as a seatmate for the field trip. Dan said, Joey and Enrique. We will fill in the blanks and see who comes out on top of the heap. Joey is mostly depressive and somewhat sarcastic, Mark said, thinking it over with a serious expression. I like him because he always wears black and he understands the inherent darkness of the human condition. I see a pattern forming here, Dan noted, glancing at Darlene with a knowing look. Okay, let us make the same list for Enrique. What has he got going for him? Enrique is sweet and funny. And he is a robot champion in the science club, Mark said. He is always making people laugh with his impressions. Does his family have money? Dan asked, his practical side showing through. I do not know, Mark replied. But they go on vacation every year and they always come back with deep tans. Florida people. I love it, Dan said, nodding. They are reliable and predictable. Thanks, Grandpa, Mark said, looking at the finished list. That really helped me clarify my priorities. So, who will it be? Darlene asked, leaning over to look at the paper. I like Joey, Mark said firmly. There is something about the brooding nature that speaks to my soul. Joey? Becky asked, horrified. Are you crazy? Enrique is a hero. He builds robots. You do not leave a robot-building hero on the table when he is an option for a seatmate. I still like Joey, Mark insisted, his mind made up. What is going on in here? Harris asked, walking into the kitchen and looking at the gathering with a bored expression. Papa helped me choose a seat mate for the field trip. Mark said. He chose the black and brooding one. Oh, a point for my team. Darlene cheered, raising a glass of water in a toast. The dark side wins again in the Connor house. Trust me, Mark, Darlene said, placing a hand on his shoulder. It is much faster and more efficient to just embrace the black and brooding lifestyle early. It saves a lot of time later in life. What is it like to grow up with a drama queen who thinks she is all that just because she was born first? Becky asked, looking at Darlene. Who even has hair like that anyway? Harris countered, pointing at her mother-wild curls. What is it like to have two older sisters who take all the air out of the room until you are practically undefeated by default? Dan asked Mark, pulling him into a warm side hug. It is a tough life, kid, but you will survive. Becky, did you hear something? Darlene asked, looking around the room with a confused expression. No, I did not hear a thing, Becky replied, playing along with the silence. Harris,